right, welcome to geometry. This is the first video I'm going to be recording of probably a bunch in terms of teaching this class. This will in many cases be your homework, and then during our 70-minute period, we'll be able to ask questions. So we're going to get started with some of the most basic terms. Now, unfortunately, some of the most basic terms can be a little boring, but it is important we understand the basics before we move on to more complicated stuff. So the first one is a point, and a point is something that has no dimension. So if I were to draw a point, it would just look like that, okay? And we can label it with a letter usually. It really just marks a spot, okay? And you'll see more about points as we move later on. They're really actually pretty simple. The next concept is a line, and a line conceptually is very important. It extends in one dimension, which means it has no width. It just has length. So for something not to have any width, we wouldn't be able to see it. But if I were to just draw a line, obviously it has to have some width, which we see right here, because you wouldn't be able to see it. But technically, it has no width. Okay, it just goes in either direction to infinity. It goes without end. So when we draw our lines, we tend to put arrows at the end of them, like such. The next thing we need to understand about a line is it's always straight. It can be diagonal, it can go up and down, it can go right to left, but lines in this class will always be straight. There's another form of geometry you can learn in college that lines don't have to be straight, but for our purposes right now, lines will always be straight. They will always go on in either direction to infinity. And they can be formed between any 2 points. So it doesn't matter where I am. If I put a point here and a point here, I could draw a line between them. I can put a point here and a point over here, and I can draw a line between them. If you can think of any 2 points in the universe, you could always draw a straight line between them. And that is an important concept to understand because it brings us to the fact that we need at least 2 points to establish a line. You need to have a minimum of 2 points. Okay. Now, finally, how many points are on this line? There's an infinite amount of points on the line. Even though we only need 2 points to establish a line, maybe a point here and a point here, once we form the line, there's an infinite amount of points on those lines. And then our third kind of basic feature is a plane. And a plane extends in 2 dimensions. Now, once again, to draw it, we kind of have to, have a little bit of imagination about ourselves. But a plane goes in 2 dimensions. So it has length, it has width. It does not have any depth, though. If you look at like a tabletop, just the surface would be an example of a plane. If you look at the floor in your house, okay, just the surface would be an example of a plane. And it appears to have edges when you draw it, but it really has no edges. It goes to infinity in all directions. And a plane can be formed by any 3 points that are not on the same line. So you can't say any 3 points because this line right here has an infinite amount of points on it. So there's 3 points on this line. But if we take a look at this plane right here, we have points A and B, which form a straight line, and then we need at least 1 point off that line. In this case, I'll choose C. I could have chosen D as well, but we'll use C, and that allows it to have some width. So when we have 3 points and one of those 3 points is not on the line, we have a plane. And those are our 3 most basic figures. Collinear points and coplanar points. I'm just giving these definitions because we're going to be using these terms later on. Collinear means points on the same line. And coplanar means points on the same plane. That's really all it means. Okay, so it means kind of a little bit of a togetherness with that co. But linear means points on the same line. Planar or coplanar means points on the same plane. Now, what we can get into next is things that are a little bit more common, such as a line segment. And that's your typical line that you would normally see in the world. Because lines in the world that you see usually don't go on forever. They do have endpoints. So technically, they're not a line, they're a line segment. So a line segment is literally just a line with endpoints. And the endpoints are what make the line finite, okay, which means it doesn't go on forever. Okay? All Our next term is array. Array is kind of like a flashlight where you have a line that extends from one point. Okay, so the flashlight where you're holding it is kind of the end point of that ray, and the light beam that shoots out, if we can imagine that light beam shooting out forever, that would be the ray. It goes on to infinity in one direction. So we have a starting point, and then the ray goes to infinity in one direction, similar to what we have here. Okay. And opposite rays, okay, rays that share an initial point but move in opposite directions, form a straight line. Okay, ray BC and ray BA form the line AC. Now, the other piece of this, and we're going to go back through these 2 pages of notes, is how we name things. And what you'll find is in math, labeling is very important. So we're going to start with labeling a point. Labeling a point, oops, sorry about that. Let me delete that out of there and go back to, okay. And labeling a point is literally just like putting a letter on it. Now I've labeled my point. Okay. When you label a line, and I'm going to come down here to do this, order doesn't matter. Line AB or line BA, you don't have to worry about your order. But what you do have to worry about is your labeling. When you label a line, you have to put arrows on either side of the line above your 2 letters. So labeling it, order doesn't matter. AB or BA would be the same. But what's key is the arrows after the line on top. With a plain, I'm a big fan of labeling it with all 4 letters. If you have something like this, you could call it plain X. But you do want to put the letters in order, A, B, C, D, or A, D, C, B. You don't want to do A, C, B, D. You don't want to jump around. But keep the letters in order, and you should be fine. Line segment. If you notice, same as a line, A, B, you could have named it BA as well. But there's no arrows, and that's very important in terms of our labeling. Okay, there are no arrows for a line segment. We just put the line above it. For array, this is the one where order matters. I know sometimes a lot of people want to write things in alphabetical order, but you can't do that here. If your initial point is A, your starting point, or your end point, you label it AB. If your initial point is B, you have to label it BA. You can always draw the arrow going to the right. That's what most people do, even if the ray is pointing to the left. But you do put that arrow, which is the one end point, and the arrow going the other in one direction when you label it. And those are our 5 most basic terms. So we have point, we have line, plane, line segment, and array. Now, the next comment in math, or I'm sorry, I should say definition in math, that's going to be pretty common, is called an intersection. And, you know, when we think of intersections, a lot of times we think of a street where 2 streets intersect. But the math definition of it, if you think about it, it kind of goes along with it, is a point or a set of points that are shared with another figure. So if you think about it, if you look at South Brunswick High School and look at where Ridge Road meets Stouts Lane, if you stood in the middle of that intersection, and please do not, but if you stood in the middle of that intersection and I asked you what street you were on, you can make the argument you were on Ridge Road and you were on Stouts Lane at the same time. And that's what a point of intersection is. It's a point or a set of points that's shared by 2 figures. So if I draw a quick one right here, like a intersecting line, excuse me, we can argue that this point right here, and I'm going to try and color it in so we can see it a little bit better. Oops, let's pick a different color. Right here, this area right here, that point is shared by both line segments. And that's essentially what a point of intersection is. So we can agree that lines will always intersect at a point. If lines are going to intersect, they will intersect at a point, and they will only intersect at one point. If you have lines, or if you have 2 different lines, those lines are either never going to intersect or intersect at one point. Lines can't intersect at more than one point. So don't try. The second one is, where do planes intersect at? And this picture below, I think, gives you a pretty good indication. We can have plane BCGF, and we can have plane ABCD here. So plane ABCD, I know it's Not a great drawing. And then we have plane B, F, G, C. And if you notice, where do those planes intersect? Well, if you look at it, they share a common point, B and C, and all along that line. So in planes, we have the intersection point is a line. Okay, so lines intersect at a point, planes intersect at a line. So if I'm looking where two planes, or I want to know where two planes intersect, essentially the answer is going to be a line. If I'm asking you where two lines intersect, essentially the answer is going to be a point. Now, we have two other types of lines that we need to discuss. And those two lines are called parallel lines. So I just erase this right here. And skew lines. So lines that intersect, we just say they're intersecting lines and they share a point. But parallel lines and skew lines have something in common and something that's not in common. Parallel lines, while they don't intersect, are on the same plane. Skew lines, while they don't intersect, are not on the same plane. So let's take a look at the line BC. And I'm going to kind of highlight it here with my red line right here. And think about what lines would be parallel to BC. Now, you probably have an idea in your head before you walked into class what parallel was. And essentially what parallel is lines that don't intersect. Well, BC does not intersect with FG. It does not intersect with AD. But it's on the same plane as them. ABCD is the same plane, and these two lines are on that same plane. That makes them parallel. FG is on the plane of BCGF, but they don't intersect, so they are parallel. We also have one more line, EH. Even though you don't see it, technically I could draw a plane between BCHE. It would be like a diagonal slice going through the box. And therefore, those three lines are parallel to BC. So what does it mean to be skew? Okay. Well, skew means this, and I'm going to put those in blue. If you take a look at line GH, we can agree GH is somewhere down here and BC is up here. GH is never intersecting with BC. But one, they clearly don't look parallel. So we give them a different name. And the reason why we give them a different name is while they don't look parallel, that's not good enough to not give another name. The key point here is they're also not on the same plane. GH is on GCDH. BC is in BCDA or BCGF or BCHE. While they share a point, they certainly don't share a plane. So when lines are not on the same plane, but they're also never going to intersect, we consider those lines skew. So GH would be skew to BC, FE would be skew to BC, and AE and DH would be skew to BC. And what you'll notice is of the four skew lines, you're going to get two pairs of parallel lines that also intersect with the other pair. That will always happen as well, as a way of checking yourself. AE and DH are parallel, but they're skewed to BC. GH and FE are parallel, but they are skewed to BC. And that's what skew lines are. This ends the lesson on section 1.1. All right, you will be getting homework, and I will be giving you an opportunity to ask questions in our second Zoom class. Our first Zoom class is going to be Introduction and Algebra Review. But this will actually be this was your first homework video. Hopefully you watched. Hopefully you learned something, and you'll be able to do your homework and bring questions next class.